slishing and a splashing over the horizon. What can it be? The pilgrims sailed the sea to find a place to call their own. In their ship Mayflower, they hoped to find a better home. They finally knocked on Plymouth Rock, and someone said, "We're there." It may not look like home, but at this point I don't care. Oh, they were missing Mother England. They swore their loyalty until the very end. Anything you say, King, it's okay, King. You know it's kind of scary on your own. Gonna build a new land the way we planned. Could you help us run it till it's grown? They planted corn, you know, they built their houses one by one. And bit by bit they worked until the colonies were done. They looked around, yeah, up and down, and someone said, "Hooray!" If the king could only see us now, he would be proud of us today. They knew that now they'd run their own land. But George III still vowed he'd rule them to the end. Anything I say, do it my way now. Anything I say, do it my way. Don't you get to feeling independent, 'cause I'm gonna force you to obey. He taxed their property, he didn't give them any choice. And back in England, he didn't give them any voice. That's called taxation without representation, and it's not fair. But when the colonies complained, the king said, "I don't care." He even has the nerve to tax our cup of tea. To put it kindly, King, we really don't agree. Gonna show you how we feel. We're gonna dump this tea and turn this harbor into the biggest cup of tea in history. They wanted no more Mother England. They knew the time had come for them to take command. It's very clear you're being unfair, King. No matter what you say, we won't obey. Gonna hold a revolution now, King, and we're gonna run it all away with no more king.
We're gonna elect a president.
No more king.
He's gonna do what the people want.
No more king.
We're gonna run things our way.
No more king.
Nobody's gonna tell us what to do.
Rocking and a rolling, slishing and a splashing over the horizon. What can it be? Looks like it's going to be a free country.
All right, we're going to get into the American Revolution. This is Chapter 6, Section 4. And we're going to see how the ideas of the Enlightenment help spur the American colonies to rebel against British rule and to create a new nation that we're currently living in. Would that it was as awesome as this? It was awesome, but not this awesome. All right, so let's first talk about the colonies in the Americas. The American colonies begin to grow, and they're awfully far away from Britain. So as they're growing and they're becoming more populous during the 1600s and 1700s, they're pretty much left alone by Britain. And as long as they keep churning money into the British coffers, they're kind of ignored. And so they really get used to running themselves. Most of these colonies are trading not only with Europe, but with the South American colonies of Spain and various other countries, not just England. So the economy is pretty varied. So in 1651, Great Britain passes an act, and it's called the Navigation Act. And what they're trying to do is restrict trade. They are trying to restrict trade to only allowing the British colonies to trade with or sell to British companies and trade companies. So they're restricting the freedom of who the colonists can trade with. They don't like this. The colonists, that is. The other thing is it's guaranteed to bring in more money for Great Britain, because if there's only one place that the colonists can trade with, you can kind of charge whatever you want. There's other trade laws that add restrictions and add different taxes, and we're not going to get into it because this isn't U.S. history. But you see these colonists beginning to identify themselves less and less as British subjects, and thinking of themselves more as American colonists, as they become more and more angry with the crown and the rules and the restrictions. So, blah, 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 fast forward, the tensions between the colonies and the British continue. And in the midst of all this is what in North America was referred to as the French and Indian War, what we've studied as the 7 Years' War. And what it is you could argue maybe the First World War, but we call it the French and Indian War because that is who we as British colonists were fighting. We were fighting the French and their Native American allies here on the continent. This is an incredibly expensive war for Great Britain. And one of the reasons they fought it was to allow their colonists, us, to spread westward without encountering any French resistance. So the British feel, hey, we fought this war to protect your interests here in North America. It is only right and fitting that you help us pay for it. Okay, and so they impose taxes, more taxes on the colonies. Now the colonists argue, you can't tax us because we didn't say you could, and we didn't give you consent. Great Britain says, wait a minute, you're British citizens, Parliament represents all British citizens, that should be good enough. And the American colonists say, look, Parliament doesn't know what it's like over here. Parliament doesn't really represent us. We should have American representatives in Parliament. Parliament doesn't want to go for that at all. So we hit a standstill. What leads to war? Well, there are several increasingly more violent protests, and of course the one you're familiar with is the protesting the tea tax with the Boston Tea Party in 1773. Groups of prominent colonists get together in 1774 in Philadelphia to address the British policies and to decide what they want to do about it. And then there is the first shots fired in the American Revolution at Lexington and Concord in 1775. So, obviously, that is a super quick rundown of the beginning of the American Revolution. But again, that's not what we're supposed to be focusing in on. What I want you to focus in on is what makes the colonists believe that they can overthrow Parliament and their king. And one of the things that feeds into that idea is all these Enlightenment philosophers. We look at the Declaration of Independence. It is, in some places, word for word from John Locke. We'll let Mr. Hughes explain it to you.
Welcome to Hip Hughes History. What I'd like to do with you guys in the next few minutes is just to explain one of the more important vocabulary words that you have in the United States history or a government course, which is the Declaration of Independence. Nothing fancy, nothing too detail-orientated, and in fact I would tell all of you out there that if you're learning this and you're just getting the major concept today, that you further your study by reading and asking good questions and doing learning. So let's do it, all right? What is the Declaration of Independence? The Declaration of Independence, when you really break it down, it's nothing but a Dear John, dump your ass, I don't love you anymore letter. It's really what it is. It's a letter. It's a I don't love you letter. Sent from the colonists, Thomas Jefferson, who wrote it, to the King of England, explaining these are the reasons why we're dumping you, why we're out of this relationship as a colonial subject to the colonial power of Great Britain. So, what is in the Declaration of Independence? Well, let me just kind of give you the summarization that I've done in class, which is a little bit silly, but gets to the major ideas, which is, Dear King, you suck. You violated my natural rights, and therefore I am outta here. See you later. When you break that down, there's much more, content in there that I'm joking around with. But at the heart of it is the idea of consent of the governed. Consent of the governed, I've explained in class, is kind of like a chicken and egg concept. That who came first, the chicken or the egg? And in a government class, it's always the people, it's always the chicken. And the idea of consent of the governed is that in order to create the egg or the government, the chicken needs to get down with a rooster. And that's consent. That's what we do in this country when we vote every 2 years or every 4 years or every year. We are giving our consent to our government to represent us, the people, and how we craft laws under our Constitution in our system of federalism. And under a colonial system, there is no consent to the governed. There is no, what do you want to do? There is, do it. So the letter is saying that because we don't have that, our rights are being violated. And because our rights are being violated, and this is the revolutionary concept, is that you have a right as people to overthrow your government. That you have a right to abolish it and to create another government that does respect your natural rights, that does protect your natural rights, and does it in a way where you have a voice, consent of the governed. So, the concept of natural rights, which is Enlightenment, John Locke, the concept of consent to the governed, and then there's definitely a grievance list in there, man. There's a whole bunch of things, like whether it is bringing us to England without, for jury trials, or it's quartering, having soldiers come in people's houses, or it's taxation without representation, or it is a triangular trade. There's a whole list in there. But at the end of the day, it is the service note letter to the king saying, we are leaving. And then there's a fight. You don't just write the letter and the angry husband goes, okay, you're leaving me. It's been nice, see ya. No, he's going to come after us and he's going to try to keep us in this marriage that we don't want to be part of. So the Declaration of Independence is nothing but a letter. Now you know. Now go tell someone important to you. Subscribe to Hip Hughes History. Do it right now because it's the right thing to do. And subscribe to all my EDU peeps down below.
All right, Professor Hughes just informed you about the Declaration of Independence. This is a very short clip of the ideas of John Locke.
John Locke was a 17th century English political theorist, and you may or may not know of him as the guy who invented America. Of course, America didn't exist in Locke's day, but the founding fathers loved John Locke so much that they used his political works as the basis for the Declaration of Independence, to the point of almost directly ripping him off. But to understand Locke's political theories, you should first get a grounding of his work on epistemology, or the philosophy of knowledge. John Locke proposed the epistemological theory of the tabula rasa, or blank state, which puts forward the notion that every human being is born with our minds completely empty, which went against the philosophical tradition that at the very least we're born with some basic rational understanding, or a set of desires and intentions commonly referred to as human nature. Locke believed there was no human nature, and each and every one of us is the author of our own character, ergo, all men are created equal.
Which is basically what we looked at in that excerpt from the Two Treatises of Government by John Locke. That goes on, but it gets increasingly less classroom appropriate, so that is where I cut it. So let's talk about the colonists winning. Despite overwhelming military advantage by the British, the colonists do have some very important advantages. And number one, most important, is they feel they are fighting for their homes and their own personal freedom. Okay? It's very difficult to defeat someone if they feel they are saving their home. They also get assistance from the French government. So much assistance that it contributes to the near bankruptcy of the French government. Why did the French help? Well, they just hate the British. And the war's very expensive for Britain. They have to fight it relatively far away, so they've got to send a lot of troops over. So in 1781, the British finally surrender at Yorktown. General Cornwallis gives in, although, of course, if you've taken any U.S. history, you know, not personally. He could not bear to actually hand over his own sword to these rowdy colonists, and the colonists win the war. So what do we do now that we have all this freedom? What kind of government do we create? What do we take these Enlightenment ideals we've been reading about, and do we make something interesting? Well, first we create a republic. And a republic is the opposite of a monarchy. where the power is vested in the king and trickles down. This literally takes monarchy and turns it on its head, and the power is vested in the people and is trickled down to the elected officials. However, the first government we created, well, it kind of sucked. The first government that we wrote up is called the Articles of Confederation, and it sets out our plan for a new republic. We set up a legislature, which is a lawmaking branch. We don't have an executive, and we don't have a judicial branch. So we have a group of people that make laws, but we have no one to enforce them and no one to judge them. So theoretically, we're making laws, and if you choose not to follow them, oh well, nothing's going to happen to you. So what you see in this first round of government that we create is this overwhelming fear of the colonists of somebody strong, in charge, taking power over them. We are really afraid of instituting something that could end up in another king. So we make our government as weak as possible and our state governments as strong as possible. What is the result of this? Well, it's chaos. There's several rebellions. Each state is printing their own money. So when you go from state to state, there's different laws and different money and different exchanges and different weights and different measures. And it's just a big old mess. And no one in the world wants to play with us or trade with us because we are not one country. We appear to be 13 tiny countries. And as 13 tiny countries, we don't really have a lot to offer. So eventually it is decided at 1787 to get back together and to revise these Articles of Confederation. And when they get together, they decide instead, there's no fixing these. They're just crap. We need to toss them and we need to start over. And so what they create at this second meeting, this second constitutional convention, is the United States Constitution that you and I live under. And this Constitution does contain many political ideas of the Enlightenment, such as, the federal system. This Constitution creates 3 branches of government. You have a lawmaking branch in the legislature, you have a judicial branch that judges those laws, and then you have a executive branch which enforces the laws that are passed by the legislature. They all 3 are separate. They can check each other. For example, if the president wants to appoint someone, that someone has to be approved by the Senate, which is in the legislature. So they are separate and they do different things, but they all kind of have their hands on each other just to make sure that one group doesn't get too powerful. This is called checks and balances. The other part of the federal system is that you and I live under 2 governments, a state government and a federal government, and we are obliged to follow the rules of both of them. And in the United States Constitution, it says these are the things that the federal government can do, and everything else that's not mentioned in here is reserved for the state governments. So they sort of divide and share the power. Now, they need to get this new constitution signed. The problem is a lot of states do not want to get on board. A lot of states feel that this new federal government with this president thing that the Constitutional Convention created, it sounds too much like a king. And there isn't anything in this Constitution that says what people's rights are. So the Constitutional Convention says, okay, the first thing we will do is to add 10 amendments or changes or additions to the Constitution that are all about the people's rights. Those first 10 amendments to the Constitution become known as the Bill of Rights. And at that point, then, all the states get on board and sign it. And the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution are right there. And I have included in the playlist for these notes a song which goes through the Bill of Rights.